talk today on Waterwise landscapes. Michelle is recording this so that we can send out the recording for everyone. So if you choose to have your video off, that's just fine. We'll keep everyone muted while we present, but we will take questions and we can take them at any time during the chat. So I'm Sarah Buckley. I'm a sustainable landscape specialist for the Nebraska Forest Service and the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. And Justin Evertson is also presenting today. But we're going to give, first, we have official research to do today. You all get to be part of a pre and post survey to see how well we do our job presenting to you. So there are three pretty simple questions. I will not know your name or how you answer these. All we're going to get is data about how well we improve the results of these questions during our presentation. So if you take a second, it should have popped up in front of you on your screen. When you finish it, it will go away. And while we work on that, we're going to give Michelle a minute to give us an update on any NSA business.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So if you just want to keep an eye on the waiting room while I'm talking and admit, because folks are still coming in. So hi, everyone. I'm Michelle DeRusha. I'm the Communications and Events Coordinator for Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. I'm sure several of you, lots of you were here last week, so you might have heard a little bit of this spiel, but I will keep it short. Just wanted to introduce you to NSA. If you're not familiar with us, we're a nonprofit organization with a mission to plant Nebraska for healthy people, vibrant communities, and a resilient environment. And we are statewide, as our name says. So we do garden making, tree planting, and environmental education and outreach, like these plant talks, and also lots of in-person events all across Nebraska, all throughout the year. We're also a member organization, which means our work is funded in part by donations from people like you who value sustainable landscaping and native plants and trees and all of those good things. So if you're not a member already, we would love for you to consider becoming a member of NSA. I put a link in the chat with information about our membership levels and benefits. So you can check that out at your leisure. And then just a heads up, we have 4 more plant talks this winter. We actually just added one more in March this week. So there's 4 more coming up. If you haven't registered for them, you can still do so. There's a link in the chat that will give you information about upcoming plant talks. And then there are buttons there for registering. Next week, a week from today, we'll be talking with Jeff Karstens, who is a horticulturist with the USDA Plant Introduction Station in Iowa. He does plant research, seed collecting. He's part of creating this seed database, kind of. He's really interesting. He came and talked to some of our affiliate coordinators or curators earlier in the fall. He's really a very interesting job, very cool job. So we thought it would be cool to introduce him to a wider audience. He was also, I think, Justin, I think this is right. Was he your intern or student of yours?
Years ago, yep.
Yeah, he had a good, strong start with Justin Evertson. And so, yeah, we're going to record all these webinars. I'll send out a link to the recording in an email later today. So if you want to catch something that you miss here, or for those who aren't able to be here today, then they can watch later. And I'm going to hand it back now to Sarah and Justin, and they're going to be talking about Waterwise landscapes, and particularly in the public landscape. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. So I did let quite a few more people into the waiting room. So I'll pass that back to you. But for anybody who's just joined us, in front of you, you probably see a survey with 3 questions. We're going to do a pre and post survey, same questions before and after, just so that we can have a little data on how well we've designed this presentation. It's not graded. We don't care about your name. It's just data. So if you want to give it a click, we're about we're a little over halfway through it, it looks like. And if your technology doesn't allow you to fill out the survey, there should be a way for you to X out of it so that you don't have to see it. But I'll end it here in a minute and it will disappear for everybody. So today we're talking about Waterwise landscapes. And specifically, we're going to focus on large scale and public projects. So part 2 in March, it's going to cover smaller scale and home-based projects. So same theory, same purpose, but some of our language today is going to be more appropriate to a large space or a publicly managed space. And as lovely as Justin's snowy tree pictures were in the last plant talk, I'm going to try to keep it colorful and green today in between our snow days so that we have something pretty to look at. So as we talk about Waterwise landscapes, we're going to go through some water conservation practices. We're going to cover rain gardens, bioswales, the difference, low impact plantings, some of Justin's favorite rain garden plants, and then we're going to talk about management tips and lessons that we've learned, but we hope we see some names in the audience that we know have experience, and we hope that we can have a discussion and share some things that we've all learned as we work in these projects. So to start off, what's a waterwise landscape? It's a really broad definition. It's any landscape that treats water as a valuable and limited resource. So there's a couple different ways that we can do this. But it always surprises me a little bit how in such an agricultural and horticultural state, we all know how important it is that we get rainy days. But once the rain falls and it's watered our gardens, we kind of move on and forget about it. And waterwise landscapes aim to not forget about that water that's left behind after a rain. So these can be public sites, these can be private sites, they can be large, they can be small, but what matters is that they're intentionally managed. So whether they're traditional landscapes or purposeful native designs, we're intentionally managing our landscape so that we treat water as a resource and not a waste product. So we can approach this from the direction that we're conserving water, that we're planting low water use species, that we're limiting irrigation, that we're trying to limit the water we need to add to the landscape. Or we can focus on collecting, cleaning, protecting the water that falls from the sky. So these could be rain gardens, bioswales, retention areas. We're trying to reduce runoff. We're trying to reduce the non-point source pollution that runoff picks up and delivers into our waterways. Trying to avoid treating water as a waste product. And we want to recharge the groundwater by absorbing that water into the ground. We basically want to do the opposite of everything in this picture, except for the enjoyment that my son is getting from that water. We want to enjoy it, but we don't want to treat it as waste. We don't like seeing it in the street full of everything that ran off our cars and our driveways. Some of the practices that we use to achieve that, it's always tree planting. It's the answer to many of our problems. We'll talk about the ways that tree canopy helps in a waterwise landscape in both goals, both to conserve water and to collect water. We can use meadows and naturalized plantings, things that don't require any added irrigation from us. We can use low input lawn, so that could be alternative species, or it could be traditional turf that we just manage in a sustainable way. It could be permeable paving. This photo in the corner is from Dundee Elementary in Omaha, and they had a challenge where this is the back of their schoolyard. This is where all the kids line up, all the parents come and go. They had a really hard time keeping anything. They couldn't do turf grass. This is such a high traffic area. So they needed to do paving of some kind, but it's in Omaha, we've got these terrace steep slopes, and they knew that whatever they paved, it would run off. So they did some permeable paving, and what you can't see just outside of the picture is, I'm wondering, Justin, last time you presented, you had this nice little pointer. Where did you get that? You know, that's okay. Just out of the picture, to our right is, you know, kind of a slope down and then a bioretention area, and all this permeable paving, the water soaks through that and ends up in that bioretention area. So we can use permeable paving, but we can also just think about where the pavement that we do put down is draining. So a lot of times we pour pavement and we pour curb with the goal of getting water off our property as quickly as possible. We can think about where that water can stay on our property in the appropriate location. We can do that through curb cuts and just grading the site the way that we want it to be. We can use wetlands. We don't cover wetlands heavily in this presentation because that's a little bit outside of our experience, but wetlands are hugely important. Wetlands are where we retain water permanently. That wetland is always going to be wet, or if it dries out, it's for a very short period of time, versus our rain gardens, bioswales, and bioretention, where we're holding water for a short period of time, but we're draining it into the ground. So I thought it would also be important to take a moment and look at what is not Waterwise. I think we learn a lot from looking at that. So if we start with this first picture on the top left, we've got some culverts emptied into this drainage ditch. And we can use drainage ditches very well, but the problems with this one are the straight, steep sides. We're getting water in here and we're moving it as quickly as possible off site. There's no chance for pollution to leave this water. There's no chance for this water to slow down. And I'm guessing the bottom is concrete, so there's no chance that this water is going into our groundwater. I think this photo is from Omaha in the past, so it probably was running into the combined sewer, which luckily is in the process of going away. We look below that, we've got a wide stretch of lawn from an unnamed photo, but it could be anywhere. We can see this photo all over many of our cities. What is this lawn doing? It's not a school. I think it's an office building. Nobody's playing on this lawn. Nobody's hosting concerts on this lawn. We're just mowing it, irrigating it, and fertilizing it. What could we do with this space to maybe keep it open? Maybe they're needing visibility or something. We can do that, but can we do it in a way that's at least adding biodiversity and at least not requiring our water resources to maintain? The middle photo is one I stopped to take after school pickup one day because it just blew my mind. They had these sprinklers running for most of the afternoon. There's clearly a leak in the line somewhere, and all their cars were in the driveway. Turn it off and call the plumber. Maybe we need irrigation, but we don't need irrigation that's watering the whole street. And the last pictures can be a tricky one because we look at that and we go, what a nice landscaped yard. But all we're really doing is making a pretty drain spout. That water's still being moved off the property as quickly as possible. So pretty, but still not Waterwise. So I'm going to close our poll here because I think we're all done. Okay. I want to take time to define some of these terms we've talked about, and you may find that the definition of rain garden, bioswale, bioretention, all of these things can vary a little bit depending on who you are and how you're using them. So I think it's important that as we discuss today, we're all on the same page with the same definition. So at NSA, our typical use of the word rain garden is a garden that's designed to capture and temporarily hold water while it soaks into the ground. They're lower than the grade, but we're not talking about a deep hole. We're using plants that can help filter silt and contaminants out of the water. They're dry most of the time, and this can be a design challenge because we need plants that can basically go underwater, but spend most of their time dry. They hold water for only a short period of time after a rain event. I'm not going to define that because there's debate among different designers as to how long that amount of time is. They overflow when they reach capacity. Sometimes they include small engineered components like silt capture basins or drains, but a lot of times they're just built to overflow when they're full. So they hold as much water as they can and they're done. This photo is from the Backyard Farmer rain chain right outside our offices. It's actually a series of 3 rain gardens. So up here at the top of the hill, we have the first basin. And when it overflows, it goes right here into the second one. And when that overflows, there's a third one that you can't see right behind this little arch that's in the shade of these trees. So what happens is the first one fills up first, but it empties the quickest. The last one fills up last, but it's in the shade, it's full of sedges. It it empties last and holds the most amount of water. But this, if you've been on campus, if you've been on the east side of our building, you know we're going straight up a hill toward a road and a parking lot. So there's a significant amount of water that has the potential to end up going through this rain chain. This rain garden is at Aldersgate United Methodist Church in Lincoln. It was planted originally in 2018, but they're always adding to it. And this is the first time it filled up, so we were all there taking pictures. So what you can't see just outside of this first big picture to our left is that there's actually a bioswale running all the way down a rather steep hill. And we end in this rain garden. You can see kind of the shape of the basin of the rain garden in the top right photo. What used to happen is this street that you can see in the bottom photo used to flood pretty heavily every time it rained. I think in this whole half a block, there was one storm drain. And we're talking about a significant hill. This hill is so steep off to our left that they built a slide into the hill for kids to slide down. It's a steep hill. A lot of water ran through this property. After this rain garden filled, Steve here told us that this road had a small layer of water on it for minutes after the rain, because most of that water was held in this basin. And also they did a lot of work when they prepared it to make sure that soil was ready to soak up as much water as possible. They did a lot of soil amending. They drilled some big augered holes and filled it with even more permeable soil so that it holds a certain amount of water, but it's constantly soaking it up. So it holds more water than it really looks like it does. It's now a really beautiful garden if you have the chance to drive by. It's between Van Dorn and South on 86th Street. They have tree plantings and gardens all over their property and welcome anybody who would like to visit and walk through. Moving on to a bioswale. The difference between a bioswale and a rain garden, there's a few, but the primary difference is we use a bioswale when we design to move water along a path. So a rain garden is collecting it, and a bioswale is moving it along a path while slowing it down to filter silt and contaminants and give a chance for that water to soak in. So if you compare this to the culvert we saw in my non-Waterwise photos, that water is moving quickly. There's nothing to encourage it to either drop its sediment or soak into the ground. This bioswale in the photo, water's going to move through there, but it's not going to move very quickly. All these plants are going to capture dirt, sediment, other pollutants, and while it's slowing down, there's a chance for at least the first half of the rain event to be soaking into the soil. So we're not trying to stop the water. We're just slowing it, and we're directing it along a path, often curved, to help slow it even further to a specific location, whether that's a rain garden or just an area that we know is safe to hold that amount of water. We choose our plants carefully to help with filtering. And again, it's dry most of the time. It may look like a ditch, but it's going to dry out between rain events. It's not designed to stay constantly wet. Here's one in Omaha, and this is kind of an interesting one because we're taking water from this big hill, we're taking water from this sidewalk, and then we're moving it down along this path. And I'm not familiar with this other than the fact that we funded it, so I don't know where we're ending up at the end. But we went back with some plants through a plant grant and helped fill in, I think, just some diversity in some spaces that needed a few more plants in them. You can see kind of where this person in white is standing. We've got kind of a rocky area trying to encourage water to come off that sidewalk and go into the bioswale instead of whatever is on the other side. And then this is a more recent project in Gearing at the Evergreen House. I know it's termed the pollinator garden because they had a larger project, but the part I want to look at is these top two photos. So this bioswale rarely fills up with water because the soil is sandy enough. It doesn't do a lot of flowing downhill. I stood in the rain for 20 minutes trying to get a picture of this filling up, but the soil was so permeable, it really didn't. But what we're trying to do here is we have a greenhouse with no gutter on its roof. And so we're having trouble establishing desirable plants here, preventing erosion. So and Chrissy's on this call, so she can take questions about this. I think I saw her name. She designed this, you know, the flow here. It's got some curves in it. Each of these rocky outcroppings is designed, if water were to flow, to slow that water down directed along the path. We fill the bottom with plants. We fill the sides with plants. And down here at the very end, there's a slightly larger basin. But again, I stood there in the rain and the soil is so permeable. Most of it soaks right in. So bioretention cell or basin or project can include rain gardens and bioswales, but we kind of use this term to imply a larger scale. So bioretention basin can be a rain garden, but if you look at these pictures, these are very large projects compared to the other two. This one's in Hastings, this one's in Omaha. This one has some large overflow drains designed into it. The one in Hastings, I believe, is just a very large space that's ready to take a lot of water. So just like a rain garden, we're capturing rainwater, we're holding it, we're filtering it, we're letting it soak into the ground, sometimes for a little longer. If you think about the amount of water that could end up in this basin after a rainfall, it's not going to drain in 24 hours. But we do still expect it to dry completely between rain events. And often, you know, we engineer it so that that water's going somewhere when we reach capacity, rather than a rain garden where we just let it overflow. So those all fell on the water capturing, cleaning, preserving side. On the low impact landscape side, this is where we're trying to create a landscape that requires little to no irrigation, little mowing, and few human resources other than time. We don't want to be fertilizing. We don't want to be adding anything to this landscape. We want it to, other than weeding and some cutting back in the spring and fall, be pretty self-sufficient. So we use native and well-adapted plants to help avoid the need for irrigation post-establishment. This photo, especially, these are parking lot plantings in Scottsbluff. They most definitely watered these to establish, and I believe they kept irrigation lines in here for cases of periods of drought. But other than that, they work on their own. We work first before planting to improve the soil so that we have good root growth and so that we're able to absorb and maintain that water. We're going to look at some pictures here in a minute of some plantings done in really hard soil where, you know, it's great. We put in really well-adapted plants, but if we can't get that rainwater into the ground, it's still not doing us a whole lot of good. We could convert small, traditionally mown areas to plantings. We'll look at a few photos of that. This is a good example. These plantings didn't exist. They were part of the parking lot. But I've got some photos of ones where we took parking lot medians and converted them from mowed strips to landscapes. We can convert traditional high input lawns to lower input species like buffalo grass or eco lawns. And then we increase tree cover both to shade and cool the landscape and also to disperse rainfall. And then tree roots really help what I was talking about, getting that water into the soil in the first place. But then trees do a good job of using that excess water when we have added a lot of water to our soils. So here is the bad soil. This is the Gearing ball fields. Some of the site prep the project coordinators had asked for did not get done the way it was asked for, and is also a very recent construction site. And what you can't see just behind Justin out of the picture is we're next door to the National Guard Armory's parking lot. So the soil is rock hard. I think we broke at least one shovel, and it was a good day's work to get these plants in the ground. We chose the most well-adapted, the most tough species that we could, and we still learned some lessons and went back the next year to replant some things. But in the end, we've gotten plant roots down into the soil, and they're doing the work for us of breaking that soil apart, creating spaces for water to absorb. And then, of course, the mulch over time, we're increasing the organic matter. So this is a good example of what could have been if we traditionally planted this, would have been a constant irrigation and an every year replacement of plants. But we were able to choose species that did eventually thrive and actually, I wish I had a more recent photo, but they turned into a beautiful landscape. Tree planting. Sometimes we don't immediately think of that when we're talking rain gardens and bioswales, but trees are key when we talk about a water-wise landscape. And they're so important because they cover spaces we can't with rain gardens. So if you think about this tree-lined street, think about being on the street, driving down the street in a heavy rainfall versus driving down an open street and trying to keep your windshield wipers moving quickly enough so that you can see, versus having the help of this tree canopy dispersing the rain as it falls. Even in a very heavy rain, it's going to be a lot lighter at the ground level under these trees. And that goes for us as humans, but also for any ground that is open to erosion or streets that are open, carrying silt and contaminants that rainwater is going to pick up. The more we can slow the water before it hits the ground, the less we're transporting to our waterways. And if we look at this upper picture on the right, we're looking at a park setting that's very well treed. And think about this turf, how much cooler it is at the ground level for that turf grass, how much greener it can probably stay in the heat without irrigation. It's going to grow a little bit slower, need a little bit less mowing, and therefore, again, even less irrigation. Versus what we can see here, which is right now very open grass, but the tree planting has been done. They will get there. This is a bioswale that included trees along the way, so that you know, hopefully by now, I think this picture was from 2017 or 18. Hopefully by now those trees have matured to a point where they're shading some of this turf, they're shading some of that bioswale. We're getting water down in there, we're cooling it, we're slowing it, and as rain falls on this slope over the tree canopy, we have less erosion taking place. This is a few pictures of some different lawn conversion options. So the first one up at the right, this is Justin's picture. So if we have questions about this, he may know more. This is an eco grass lawn, a seed mix from Prairie Moon Nursery, and it's planted in Lincoln. So we're talking about some pretty drought hardy species. We're not talking about something that needs mowed every week. Hopefully we're spacing that out. If they're mowing it, it looks like they may not be mowing it more than a couple times a season. And we've got diversity in that species. Instead of 1 or 2 species of grass, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. If we move to the right, we see some photos from Morton Arboretum. They took their mowed, irrigated turf grass strips, turned them into native plants, added some curb cuts so that we have water going into our medians instead of into our storm drains, and how much more pleasant to park next to. Again, I don't have a photo to show, but Evertson Gardens has done the same thing. If you drive through their parking lot, there's no mowed grass strips. There's native plants everywhere. It's a beautiful parking lot's a beautiful part of the garden. Our parking lots don't have to be barren or mowed. What a silly job to finish mowing the whole property and then have to haul out your push mower, bring it out to the median to mow this little strip. We'll keep going clockwise. We have a buffalo grass lawn is Bruce Hoffman's. If he's here today, maybe he can answer some questions too. Converted his whole lawn to buffalo grass. It's not for everybody. It's not for every site. I think we've all heard some of the issues with it, but when it fits the site and when it's done well, it makes a beautiful lawn, makes a very low input lawn. And you know, here it is in the winter too. It might be brown, but it's fully covering that ground. And then last, but definitely not least, is our courtyard at Kime, is a clover lawn. So we've all seen, sometimes we take clover and we leave it in the turf grass. This is just clover. It's just a patch of clover, and it's really neat. It's very soft and fluffy. And pretty to look at, and you can compare it directly across the sidewalk to the regular turf grass lawn. So I'm going to use this slide to transition over to Justin. So along with all of the planting styles we can do, we still need to focus on the management practices that we use in any landscape, whether we've planted natives, buffalo grass, or turf grass. How we manage that landscape matters. So we make intentional management choices that help limit the need for supplemental water in the landscape and improve water infiltration into the ground. The first step is to build and maintain a healthy soil. Whether you have turf grass, trees, or a rain garden, the soil is the base of all of that. We keep the ground covered either with plants or mulch, and we limit inorganic mulches and pavement. So when we talk about inorganic mulches, whether it's rubber, rock, those kind of soil coverings, they add no organic matter to the soil, so they're not helping with infiltration. There is a place for a rock garden. It's a very specific place, and it's reasonably rare compared to how often we see rock used as mulch. So we limit inorganic mulches and pavement. There's place for permeable pavement, but it can't be the only solution. We can't just take all the pavement we have, turn it permeable, and say we're done. We need to use it appropriately and use plants where we can. We use native and well-adapted plants. They can handle moderate periods of drought without irrigation. There's a place for every cool species, but if the base of our landscapes is native and well-adapted, we've significantly limited our need for irrigation. Maintain the irrigation systems. So like that picture I showed at the beginning of the leaking pipes spraying everywhere. Irrigation's only as good as the person using it. Maintain it. Use your timed automatic systems appropriately. Don't leave them alone. They're not AI yet. They're not smart enough to make choices for themselves. Use moisture and rain sensors. Turn them off when they're not needed. Adjust our mowing practices by the time of year so that we can avoid stressing the turf. Stressed turf needs more water. Use our fertilizers appropriately. There's a time and place for it, but fertilizer increases growth, and increased growth needs more water. So with that, Justin, I'll turn it over to you. If he is ready. Michelle, have we had any questions that we need to stop and answer, or should we save them for the end? Okay.
Yeah, I was working on putting up a couple sources. There was a question in there about where to get more information. I'll do that at the end with omahaplants.com and then also UNL Water. And I'll put those links up at some point.
Good, thanks, Justin. I missed that one, the Q&A. Yeah, if you guys have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat, either one. I'll try to keep an eye on it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here and give you guys some more PowerPoint to deal with. I apologize that. Can you see that, Michelle? All right, let's get going. I just want to follow up. That was awesome, Sarah. You really nailed it for what's all involved in a Waterwise landscape. There's not a whole lot more I want to add other than maybe in this winter doldrum. Let's take a look at a few pictures of some project examples just to share and learn from, but we'll also touch quickly on the management issues that come along with these landscapes. So my first simple thought, though, the more deeply rooted we use plants or that we have plants in our landscapes, the more water absorption and drought tolerance we'll have. And so that if we can get it in our head that, you know, we think of the community landscape with all this pavement and mowed surface, and that really makes the soil and the pavement much less absorbent to water. So if we think about if we can convert much more of our open space to deeply rooted plants, it doesn't have to be all prairie plants, but there's just this whole concept that if we have more roots going into the ground, our plants are going to be able to absorb more water, and they're also going to be more drought tolerant. So wherever we can impact that makes a lot of sense for both drought tolerance and stormwater. I'll show you a few examples and talk about the management issues that come along with them. Erica Carlson, I see you were on the Zoom today. She's my compatriot out in Waverly that is involved in the Wayne Park across from her house. And she's adopted some spots out there in the park. There you are, Erica. And if you want to chime in with anything here, because she's been front and center to seeing how you try and do some of this in a public landscape. So in a public landscape like a big park in Waverly, we're trying to be relaxed about the landscape. So we live with a lot of weeds, and then we take massing areas that we can convert from lawn grass to more deeply rooted, taller growing plants. So here's maybe a tree island where we've added sedges and understory plants to be more deeply rooted. And then we have planted pockets of trees and shrubs at borders or areas where they make sense. We've also relaxed about the lawn, so it's more of a polyculture lawn that we try to mow high. We don't irrigate, and we don't add other things to it. But I will be the first to tell you, this isn't everybody's cup of tea. And I know the city mayor and elected officials get some complaints about weeds and issues. So that's always something to think about when we're talking about landscapes, the management side of it. Anything you want to add there, Erica?
I think that pretty much covers it at Wayne Park. I know that we've had $6.5 million aquatic center
Yes.
recently built there, and that construction has caused quite a bit of an erosion problem. So we're looking at some options for kind of waterwise landscaping with the drainage areas that already exist.
Right on, Erica. Good point. So that's going to be a big project this year, and we're going to pursue grant funds to do a water-wise bioretention planning around that. Thank you for pointing that out, Erica. So, hey, yeah, and the mayor would like to say, hey, come on out to Waverly and spend your money at our aquatic center. So here's another project in Waverly Lawson Park on the other side of town. We've just taken little vignettes and planted them to native plants. It's a bold in your face kind of solution. Some people don't like it. There's weed pressure in it. But I'll tell you what, these last 2 drought years, these little vignettes of prairie have shined because the weed pressure is less and they don't mind the drought. At the Waverly High School, I worked with a teacher a few years ago to do what we call a prairie landscape garden at the front door. This gets a lot of negative feedback from people who think it's a weedy mess. So just something to think about as you're contemplating these kinds of landscapes. Another great example of a school project is Beatty Elementary right here in Lincoln. And Karen Cresswell is the person in this picture. She has adopted this space in her neighborhood for 25 years now. She pours her heart and soul into this. So it's a fabulous place, but just be aware that a lot of time gets put into places like this that function well. Here's a landscape that the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum helped develop and manage for years. It was the home of the Nebraska Environmental Trust. They are no longer there, and this landscape across from the state capitol in downtown Lincoln has now been robed out. They didn't like the looks of it, the people who came to manage the property, so it's all gone. And be aware that those things can happen over time. Sarah showed these pictures from downtown Scottsbluff. I don't need to add a whole lot more, but just another really good example of how projects can come about, and be aware that they have to put a lot of time into managing these landscapes. A couple more. On the left is the Scottsbluff Library, and on the right is a bioretention swale being planted by the Statewide Arboretum about 10 years ago in Scottsbluff. If you ever get out to Chadron, please visit Chadron State College and look at the work of Lucinda Mays. She's the retired horticulturist there now, but look at this bold in your face Sand Hills prairie planted right in front of the Sandoz Center. A couple other projects. On the left is a bioretention parking lot filter strip at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. And on the right, if you go to the Nebraska State Fair, look at the bioretention plantings at the state fairgrounds. This was a fun project we were able to be involved with over the years at Wayne State College, a little bit of a tall prairie bold solution right in the middle of campus. That went away also. It had a lot of negative feedback from people that didn't like the weedy nature, but it went away in a building expansion, and they haven't had a way to put it back in the middle of campus. So what do you think about spaces like this that are bold, kind of in your face? They're fuzzy. They look a little bit wild. Do you have room for them in our public landscapes? We sure hope we do, but just be aware that we're not the only ones using these spaces, and sometimes it takes a lot of work to get people to accept them. Fireworks Restaurant in Southeast Lincoln, we were involved in years ago, and that's still a very functional space to this day. This is down in Kansas at the Johnson County Transit Center in Olathe, Kansas. They took a fescue lawn and converted it to prairie. I love it. And then Sarah mentioned this earlier, parking lots and permeable pavement have their role in these kinds of places. She mentioned Lauritsen Gardens in Omaha, right on. That is a fantastic local example. And then here in the Morton Arboretum at Lisle, Illinois, what they did in bioretention sense is they just turned the concept on its head. So in the past, in this picture on the upper left, that's a parking lot median with a convex raised median. So all the water is pushed to the curbs. Whereas on the right, they're capturing, slowing, and filtering that water right through the parking lot islands. So just a simple mindset change. Sarah mentioned Aldersgate Gardens in Lincoln. If you're ever in Lincoln, stop and visit 84th and South Street. They are doing all kinds of great things at Aldersgate Garden. And they're working on developing these lawn alternatives, which will include mowable plants that can be mowed just a little taller as an alternative to lawns. Sarah showed this picture too, the eco grass lawn. There are sedge meadows that we can think about in public spaces. And then as I wrap up here in the heart of the cold January winter, let's just throw a few pictures at you from growing season with color and with insects abuzz, because those days are coming to us before too, well, not before too long, in a few months, but here are just a few examples of plants to think about. And we're going to focus on native plants. Native plants rock for all these wonderful reasons, but I will highlight number 9. Native plants are not perfect. They require careful and committed management, and they will fade over time in our landscapes if we're not careful. So just be aware that all of these things take care, management, maintenance time, and sometimes we don't give it enough. Here's native plant beauty. This is from Chase County, a picture right off the highway a few years ago. How can you not love some of these plants like prairie spiderwort, penstemons? Here on the left is dwarf blue indigo. This is a taller native prairie plant that can live for decades. And its cousin on the right is the white wild indigo, which is actually can tolerate some very wet soils. There are all kinds of purple coneflowers, like the pale purple coneflower on the left and the western purple coneflower on the right. These are milkweeds. The one thing I've learned about milkweeds in my career is they're hard to cultivate as a garden plant. So accept them where they want to grow. Carve out a space where you're going to get the milkweeds to come naturally, and then let them be if you can do that. Gay feather, all kinds of gay feathers from our prairies that we can use in our landscapes. Same with goldenrods. This Wichita Mountains goldenrod in the middle, folks, I'm telling you, this comes out of the Oklahoma prairies, but it will persist for years and years in a dry landscape in central and western Nebraska. The zigzag goldenrod on the right is actually very shade tolerant. So imagine that there's plants that cover the gamut of conditions. Asters and goldenrods go well together, so I can never get enough of the aromatic aster that we use in our landscapes. And a really great plant that is kind of a good shrub alternative, especially for rain gardens, is the Amsonia, the blue star, and there's several different types. Look at this one coloring up so great in the fall. That's a plant that you can cut back to the ground after it does its blooming, and then it'll resprout and give you a shrub-sized perennial that'll be in your garden for years and years. And then let's wrap up with what we think about the prairie, which is our grasses. If we're not utilizing grasses, we're missing the boat. So these are two very drought tolerant species, blue grama on the left and side oats grama on the right. If you go out to western Nebraska, maybe you're at the foot of the buttes, Crow Butte there at Fort Robinson State Park, you'll see all this prairie June grass. What a fantastic garden plant if we use it right, especially for western Nebraska. Prairie dropseed on the left would be a grass in your landscape for decades, and then little blue stem on the right doesn't persist as long, but you can't beat its fall color. And then taller grasses where you might have wet meadows, switchgrass on the left, Indian grass, and big blue stem. And then Sarah mentioned also too, sedges are coming on strong now for landscape use in rain gardens and bioretention. And here's just a few species that I've had good luck with: fox sedge, Pennsylvania sedge, the plains oval sedge, and palm sedge all work really well in eastern Nebraska. I'm amazed at their drought tolerance and wet tolerance, shade tolerance, and sun tolerance. Wow, who knew the world of sedges would be so great for us? So, and then we often end up with shady or part shade conditions. That doesn't mean there aren't really great plants that can help you be more water wise. Bloodroot, geranium, woodland phlox, bonesetter, snakeroot, all great plants to think about. And then as Sarah mentioned, don't forget about our trees and shrubs. We don't have enough time for it here, but that's a layer of plants that help with that deeply rooted notion of bringing water through to the lower profiles of the soil. So our woody plants are helpful with that. And if we do it right, all these plants we bring, here's why we emphasize native plants, because they bring native insects. And those native insects bring native birds. And isn't the landscape just much better when it's alive with insects and high quality birds? That doesn't mean we don't use non-native plants. There are many wonderful non-native plants. Some of our best plants actually for city use are probably non-natives because they tolerate heat, they tolerate compacted soils, and they just expand the palette of usability. So it doesn't mean we never use it doesn't mean we don't use non-native plants. Just be aware, don't use invasive plants. And the Nebraska Invasive Plant Group does a good job of listing those invasive species to avoid. And then I'll wrap up with this. It's kind of funny, but test your weed tolerance. One of the things that really is the most limiting in terms of landscape management is weed tolerance. We do most of our landscape management to control weeds, to add water and to control weeds. If you can recognize which weeds are really problematic and which aren't, and if you're accepting of more of them, that relaxed notion can really help reduce the amount of water being applied to landscapes, but also the amount of chemicals running off the landscape when we're trying to control them. It doesn't mean we don't control bad weeds, but hey, here's a few weeds that maybe you can just let go in a certain context. So with that, I will stop my screen share.
Okay.
And I will get back and I will add those, or maybe you already did, Sarah, those links to good sources to go for.
I have not yet. I was gonna say we have a long list of questions. Both before we go to those, I have a question for you. If you could pick 5 plants only for a rain garden design, what would you plant?
Justin?
Justin.
Yeah, well, I would definitely start with sedges in those wet bottoms. And then on the drier sides, I'd be putting in other native plants, probably side oats grama. So maybe I'd pick a couple different sedges and then side oats grama at the side. I would always add an aster or a goldenrod for fall bloom. And I'd probably be sure to add either a purple coneflower or a liatris on the drier slopes as well. And then in the bottom, you know, there's going to be things like Joe Pye weed or a cardinal flower that are going to like it wet. So how's that? That's about 7 of them.
I think that was more than 5, but I think that's going to answer several of the questions I see in the comments. So another couple of my favorites is bee balm. If you've got space to let it expand, it's not one that the individual plant will live forever. If you're able to allow seeding in your garden, I like a bee balm in a rain garden. And then asters, you see them a lot in the campus rain gardens, especially along the edges. And they add that beautiful fall color that goes so well with the goldenrods, like Justin mentioned. Before we move fully into the questions, Justin's made this point a couple times, and I just wanted to say it kind of explicitly. We have at NSA, we talk a lot about low maintenance landscapes. We did not talk about those today. rain gardens, bioswales, they're working landscapes. We're asking them to do a lot for us. We're asking them to capture water, remove silt from and pollutants from the water. We're asking them to capture everything that runs off the landscape, and that includes all of the weed seeds and woody seeds that you love so much in your garden. So you made the point a couple times that they take work. We ask them to do work and they take work from us. I think rain gardens are excellent features in so many landscapes. We have to be prepared for them. All right.
Right on. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough.
And
Landscapes
I
need
think that
editing.
sorry, Justin.
Our landscapes need constant editing to
Yeah.
not look wild and forgotten. Yeah.
And some of the plants we mentioned are long lived and they'll be there forever. Some of them they need to reseed, or through time as the silt changes and the soil changes, a plant that was really appropriate at the beginning will not work as well, and we have the opportunity to try something new. I saw some questions about that in the chat, and we could give you an age for each individual plant, but I can't tell you the age that every single rain garden will live to, or even how quickly it will silt in. That depends on the design. It depends on what is around you, what you're collecting water from. It depends if you used any engineered silt capture systems. Those usually get scooped out at least once a year. But we have to just kind of assume that a landscape will need editing at some point, whether that's removing of silt, changing of plants, things like that. And it's going to be a little dependent on each individual setting. So
Yeah, and Sarah, we might add here too, for a public scale landscape, sometimes less is more. And when it's an issue in terms, it's easy to do a really biodiverse garden in your backyard, but in a public landscapes, that's harder. And so sometimes if you limit the plant palette, especially a bioretention planting, maybe the bottom of that is just cordgrass and sedges. And then it makes it much easier to control woody weeds or even perennial weeds that might come into that, because you can really see quickly what's a weed and what's not. So start by asking your question, what's your management or maintenance capabilities before you start designing and adding plants?
yeah, I agree. Some of the most successful public rain gardens I've seen have maybe 5 to 6 different species
Right.
in
Yeah.
really large areas. So I'm just going to start going through the questions. I'm going to start at the top. So we'll get through them. And if you have a verbal one, I think we'll do 3 typed questions, and then we'll give a minute for some verbal ones. And I will pop up that post survey here at 12:55. So if anybody has to leave right at 1, we don't hold you, and you can always go back to the recording for answers to questions. So
Also, Sarah, just to interrupt for 1 second, there's 3 other questions under the Q&A too.
yes.
Okay.
And some of them overlap, so I might combine. So Emily and Linda both ask about plant lists and resources for purchasing them. The first place we always send people is our website. Michelle, could you just drop a link straight to our resources page? But there's excellent ones from Extension. There's nurseries that have really good lists. So if you have a specific need, send us an email. But I would first check out our resource page and then Extensions.
Yeah, and Sarah, I put in 2 links. One is to omahaplants.org, because Omaha Stormwater has worked hard on this for the years. And the other one is UNL Extension and their stormwater group. You'll find the kind of the plant list Bibles on both of those sites.
Agreed. Let's see. And then Gary asks, can water be trapped and then pumped to another site for irrigation? Is a permit required? This is a big question. Justin and I went to a conference last year. We learned about all sorts of different containers that can get buried underground under parking lots, and they're filling them up with water, but they never answered the question of what they do with the water after. And I meant to ask that, but they were very busy. So we don't know the answer to that, and we certainly can't answer permit questions. That would be something you need to talk to your whoever you fall under. If you're rural, you need to make sure you're talking to your county and your NRD. If you're within a city, you definitely need to talk to your city. I would imagine depending on the scale that you're talking about, some form of permit or at least engineering specifications would be required.
You can trap water in a water barrel or a
Yeah.
cistern. And there's been some effort in the past to bury larger collection cisterns or big tubs. And you could try to do that. That's a lot of work, but it's an idea to capture roof water.
Yeah. I mean, I use a rain barrel. A few of the sites that we showed, they weren't in the pictures, but it depends on the scale you're talking about, Gary. I guess I assumed you were talking about a pretty large scale, but if you're just talking about a rain barrel at home, yes, that's where most of my watering water comes from. Did anybody want to ask a question verbally? You would be more than welcome. Otherwise, we'll keep going through the. Okay.
Oh yeah, good.
Show.
There's some good comments here from
There are
others.
some great. Go ahead, Justin, if you want to read some of them.
I liked what Linda Van Dyke said about the plants that have worked good for them at Chalco in Omaha.
Yeah, there's some great plant suggestions in the comments if you guys haven't been reading them. And then just to offer some, maybe peace of mind to people who've been struggling with specific plants. We don't all get to have the same plants in our gardens. My guess would be that I grow well something that Justin can't grow.
Yeah.
And he grows well something that would never live in my garden. So unfortunately, we can't say that every single plant's going to work for every single person. But I would bet that those of you who struggled with liatris have something that everybody who's growing beautiful liatris cannot grow. Linda, we kind of talked about how long it takes to fill in a basin with silt depends almost completely on the design of it and what is around it. If people are having trouble with things filling very quickly, they usually use, especially along like parking lots, they usually use a sediment basin of some kind that you can just take the top off and scoop it out. And that I think gets done. I would at least do it once a year if you have that easy of a time. Then we have a question about rain gardens. Do they pose a risk of foundation issues when properly designed? And I would say, I'm glad you said properly designed, because I would never properly design a rain garden that close to my foundation. Do you have anything else to offer about that? I mean, you should be moving water probably away from a building.
Yeah, get it out away from your house a little bit. You'd be surprised though that soupiness of a rain garden doesn't transfer very far into the laterally in the soil profile. So you're usually not going to end up, if it's several feet from your house, it's usually not going to impact your foundation, but there's a lot of caveats there.
Yeah, I found in the rain garden that I have, a few feet out horizontally will be damper, but it won't be as wet as the rain garden. It's my goal is to move it down, but that does really matter when you mention being properly designed. If you improperly design anything, you can cause a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I see some rabbit problems, and again, we can't take away the rabbits, so we just have to choose some different species.
I see Bob has a good reply here too about longer lived prairie plants. That's been my experience. Some plants, some of our natives are very short lived, or they're almost designed to be reseeding. Some are very long lived. Of course, if you've got animals chewing on the roots, that might shorten their life, but you'd be surprised how long some of these can live. I mentioned Absonia and Baptisia as two that have lived for me for dozens of years. So
we have a specific question about plants for an area that has poor soil, it's very shady, and is usually dry as a substitute for bluegrass and fescue. That's a tough site, Patricia. I'll tell you what I'm trying this year. I don't know if it will succeed. We have a slope under the shade of multiple trees next to our house that's bone dry, and it's a slope. So I'm going to cover the thing in Sweet William and see how it does. I'll let you know. But there are sedges, well, there are a few sedges, Bob, if you want to jump in the chat and remind us of a couple sedges for shady, dry areas. I know it's not a long list, but I thought there was maybe one or two. Otherwise, I don't know, Justin, do you have any
Yeah,
other?
definitely there's some sedges that'll tolerate that dry. And then if you're in my yard, you've come to accept the creeping, what's that creeping weed? The anyhow, that everybody wants to get rid of, but creeping Charlie. And I've come to accept it in the lawn, but I try to pull it out of my landscape beds.
Mm-hmm. There was, shoot, I missed a good question back at the beginning because they were rolling in so fast about some, excuse me. Is there, okay, so a good Waterwise lawn alternative that is best if you want to avoid encroachment into flower beds. And so I think you have to just know the propagation method of the plant. So when we talk about a lot of our traditional turf, it's a running plant. That's why it moves so quickly into our flower beds. But if we go for anything clump forming or that primarily spreads itself through seed, that will be easier to avoid.
Yeah, that's a tough call for sure. We dump on turf grass here a lot, but believe it or not, if we didn't have turf grass, we'd be looking for a species like that that can tolerate some shade and tolerate mowing. And so don't give up on lawn as a possibility, or turf grass properly managed and not fussed over for shade, part shade, and the edge of your perennial beds.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us are aware of a perfect, it would be nice if we could use clover for that, but clover needs sun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where creeping Charlie, it's like the shade tolerant antithesis of clover. So,
Yep, I agree. And something I've had a little success in my shade. I've got just shady, dry conditions on the west side of my house, and the soil is so poor there that I think that's a lot of the problem. And I've had success in my beds mending that with organic matter. Then I at least have a chance of getting those shady, dry plants to grow. Where, I mean, it was basically dust. I don't know where they got this stuff.
yeah.
It was awful. So your soil type, there's changes you can make to that. You're not going to chop down the tree to get sun, but you can make changes to the soil. And along that same line, Anne asked how clay soil impacts rain gardens. Do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. Yeah, clay soil is not our friend on most of this, but it can be helpful in extending the drought tolerance of plants. So, but anyhow, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that was what they ran into when I talked about at Aldersgate, how we drilled some holes with an auger and amended those. They amended all of the soil. But when you amend with top dressed compost and plants, you expect some time. That takes time for that compost to work in. We didn't have time with a rain garden. It needed to drain the first time it filled up. So they drilled 3 big auger holes and amended that heavily with a very permeable soil. That way, the rest of it has a few years. The plant roots and the compost will work on that, but there's at least a few spots where the water can get through. And that's a huge problem with rain gardens. And when you see people complaining about rain gardens not draining in a timely manner, it often comes back to the soil. And it's not just clay. Sometimes it's compaction. Sometimes it's clay and compaction.
One other thought here, quick, Sarah. We're going to do another follow-up on these for the homeowner scale. And I think we can dive deeper into plant choices. And when is that, Michelle? March
21st, I want
Yeah.
to say. That's our last plant talk of the winter as we edge into spring. Waterwise for homeowners
Good.
specifically.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll show
Couple
more
things.
plants.
I listed some sedges for shady areas in the chat. I got that list from Bob last year, so it's legit. I didn't just make it up. Bob is the plant guy we did. an article in the Seed last year on making a sedge meadow in your yard. And so he listed some sedges for shady areas. Also, did you see the question, and I may have spaced off on this and maybe already answered it, from Gary on water being trapped? Can water be
Yes.
trapped? Okay.
We
Did you answer
tried,
that one?
but we
Okay.
ended up needing a little more information, and hopefully we pointed
Okay.
him in the right direction to find that.
Okay.
And Michelle, there's a question in here about what is the seed?
Oh, yeah, I answered that a little ways down,
Okay.
but I will say it just for the record here. The Seed is our annual member magazine. So if you are a member of NSA, you will get a beautiful full color magazine publication. It comes out once a year in January. We just mailed the 2024 issue this week. So it's a great member benefit. We do post back issues downloadable on our website, and that's under, if you go in the menu under the resources, there's a you can click on something that says NSA publications, and all of our publications are eventually available for download. But if you want the pretty print copy, it's a member benefit.
So we have a new question. I'm gonna leave the poll up. We have 38 of 53 people. If a couple more people take a minute and answer that poll, it would be fantastic. We have another question from Erica Justin on how a site can be tested for compaction of soil. And it's really simple. Try to dig. But also, if you want to see what we sometimes talk about, a permeability test would be if you dug a hole, and there's if you want the actual calculation, there's specific sizes of holes and specific amounts of water you put in them. But I don't usually get that specific. I just want to see if it drains. So dig a hole, maybe a foot, 10 to 12 inches in diameter, fill it with water, and wait a few hours and see how quickly that water's draining in. You can really quickly tell if the surface is compacted, but that'll help you understand if there's room below for that water to go. And you can Google the permeability calculations if you want those exact. They'll give you exact diameter of hole, exact depth, amount of water to put in, and it goes into this equation and shoots out a number. But usually it's enough for me just to dig a hole and see if the water does in fact drain in 10, 12, 24 hours.
They do make tools for that too, and we have access to one here in our unit for soil compaction. It's fun to use that out in the landscape, so they're kind of costly, but you can buy things like that.
Yeah, there's like it's a probe that you stick down in the soil and it's attached to something. I'm not 100% sure how it works, just that it does. And it'll tell you the amount of force needed to get through that soil.
Yeah, it's really telling too when you compare a turf grass lawn to a perennial bed that has nice soil in it. It's night and day difference. So are you going to cover the answers to the questions too, Sarah, before we
do you want me to?
I would like to know.
Okay. Well, I will end the poll then, and we will. What?
And while you're doing that, I just want to say Brad put a link to looks like an article or product for soil compaction testing, so that might be useful. It's in the chat.
Erica, I know you're with a city, and so you may need a more formalized version of that. For the average homeowner, it's usually enough for us to know compacted or not compacted. But sometimes when you're doing, construction and you're doing large scale rain gardens, you do need to know a little bit more specifically. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and then so the first question: when used correctly, which of the following could be a component of a Waterwise landscape? It was all of them except the recycled rubber mulch. So trees, native plants, turf grass, drains, buffalo grass, all of it fine. We define a Waterwise landscape as using organic materials or getting water into the soil. And our inorganic mulches, they don't do anything to help our soil. They do cover the ground and they get points for that. But we need to, as we've just been talking about permeability of soil, we need to be able to increase that if we're going to get water to drain. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you? That's up to you. There's no right answer. And then match the landscape feature to its definition. Did they give A and B answers? So the rain garden was the response that slows and or holds and filters water. And the bioswale slows and filters moving water. That was the difference there. Alan, how deeply are sedges rooted? Deeply? I think it depends on the species, Justin. Do you have any specific knowledge
Yeah.
on that?
They're
I've
probably
heard up
not
to 3
super
feet.
deep, but yeah,
Oh.
6 to 8 inches probably, but yeah,
Bob
Bob's
said-
on here.
What'd you say, Bob?
I've heard up to 3 feet. I know when they're doing the floating wetland, treating wetlands, they I asked them how far are those roots just dangling in the water, which is not, where we want a sedge dangling in the water. But he said the roots went down 3 feet below those things. I couldn't believe it. And I think it's pretty similar in a prairie type situation as well, because there's dry land sedges and wetland sedges. So man, they have a root system to admire and behold.
Yeah, they're so thick too.
That's a good question. Because in a rain garden, when we talk about using plants to improve the soil, we're looking for a combination of those really deep rooted plants, like a baptisia and our grasses, and our bulb forming or corm forming plants like our liatris, because they break soil apart horizontally, and our deep rooted plants punch down. But then the fibrous rooted things, even a short root system, plants shed some roots every year. So they grow a whole bunch, and around a third of those die every year. And
Right.
those dead roots create open cavities of organic matter in the soil. So what we're looking for is a combination of all different kinds of root systems.
Right on, yeah.
I just wanted to say one more thing. I do not feel confident that we found all the questions in this chat. You guys were
I-
busy in the chat.
I'm pretty confident.
okay.
I think we covered most of them.
Okay.
I think we covered all of them, to be honest.
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say, if we didn't sufficiently answer what you meant by the question, arboretum@unl.edu is our email, and Michelle or Toby will get the question to whoever can answer it best.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good idea. Okay. Are you guys all set, Justin and Sarah?
Yeah, that was awesome.
I think so.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Justin and Sarah, and everybody who attended. We'll be here next week, Thursday, 12 noon, Central Time with Jeff Karstens. And he's really interesting. He has a cool job. So I think we'll all learn a lot from that one. plantnebraska.org. If you need to register, get more information on the Plant Talk. So thank you. See ya.